So we're going to go ahead and get started in our chapter today. And if you remember last time, Brian discovered that there was some fish, and he's hoping that maybe he's discovered another food source. So let's see what happens. You should be on page 105 in your book. The fish spear didn't work. He stood in the shallows and he waited again and again, and the small fish came closer and closer, and he lunged time after time, but it was always too slow. He tried throwing it, jabbing it, everything but flailing with it, and it didn't work. The fish were just too fast. He had just been so sure, so absolutely certain that it would work the night before. Sitting by the fire, he had taken a willow and had carefully peeled the bark until he had a straight staff about 6 feet long and just under an inch thick at the base, the thickest end. Then, propping the hatchet in a crack of the rock wall, he had pulled the head of the spear against it, carving a thin piece off each time, until the thickened tapered down to a needle point. Still not satisfied, he could not imagine hitting one of the fish with a single point. So he carefully used the hatchet to split the point up in the middle for 8 or 10 inches, and then jammed a piece of wood up into it, the split, to make the two-pronged spear with points about 2 inches apart. It was crude, but it was effective, and it seemed to have a good balance when he stood outside the shelter and hefted the spear. He had worked on the fish spear until it had become more than just a tool. He had spent hours and hours on it, and now it didn't work. He moved into the shallows and he stood, and the fish came to him just as they had the day before. They swarmed around his legs, some of them almost 6 inches long, but no matter how hard he tried, they were just too fast. At first he tried throwing it, but that had no chance. As soon as he brought his arm back, and well before he threw, the movement frightened them. Next, he tried lunging at them, having the spear just above the water and thrusting with it. And finally actually put the spear in the water and waited until the fish were right up in front of it. But still, somehow, he telegraphed his motion before he thrust, and they saw it and flashed away. He needed something to spring the spear forward, some way to make it move faster than the fish, some motive force, a string that snapped, or a bow. A bow and arrow. A thin, long arrow with a point in the water, and the bow pulled back so that he had to do was release the arrow. Yes, that's it. He had to invent the bow and arrow. He almost laughed as he moved into the water and put his shoes on. The morning sun was getting hot, and he took his shirt off. Maybe that was how it really happened. Way back, some primitive man tried to spear a fish, and it didn't work, so he invented the bow and arrow. Maybe it was always that way. Discoveries happened because they needed something to happen. He had not eaten anything yet this morning, so he took a moment to dig up the eggs and eat one, and then he returned them, banked the fire with a couple of thicker pieces of wood, and settled the hatchet on his belt, and took a spear in his right hand and set off to the lake to find wood to make a bow. We went without a shirt, but somehow about the wood smoke smell on him kept the insects from bothering him. As he walked to the berry patch, the raspberries were starting to become overripe. Just in 2 days, he would have to pick as many as possible. After he found the wood, he did take a little time to pick a few and eat them. They were full and sweet, and when he picked one, 2 others would fall off the limbs into the grass, and soon his hands and cheeks were covered with red berry juice, and he was full. That surprised him, being full. He hadn't thought he would ever be full again. He knew only of hunger, and here he was full. 1 turtle egg and a few handfuls of berries, and he felt full. He looked down at his stomach and saw that it was still caved in, and not a bulge out of it. As he would have 2 hamburgers and a freezy slush, it must have shrunk. There was still hunger there, but not like it was, not tearing at him. This was hunger that he knew and would be there always. Even when he had food, a hunger that made him look for things, see things, a hunger to make him hunt. He swung his eyes around to the berries to make sure that the bear wasn't there as his back, and he moved down to the lake. The spear went out before him automatically, moving the brush away from his face as he walked. When he came to the water's edge, he swung left, not sure what he was looking for, and knowing what wood might be best for a bow. He had never made a bow, never shot a bow in his life, but it seemed that it would be as long the lake near the water. He saw some young birch, and they were springy, but they lacked snap somehow, and so did the willows. Not enough whipback. Halfway up the lake, as long as he started to step over a log, he absolutely terrified by an explosion under his feet. Something like feathery bomb blew up away in a flurry of leaves and thunder. It frightened him so badly that he fell back down, and then it was gone, leaving only an image in his mind, a bird. It had been almost the size of a very small chicken, only with a fantail and stubby wings that slammed against his body and made a loud noise. Noise there and gone. He got up and brushed himself off. The bird had been speckled brown and gray, and it must not be very smart because Brian's foot had been nearly on it before it flew. Half a second more and he would have stepped on it and caught it, he thought, and eaten it. He might be able to catch one or spear one. Maybe, he thought, it tasted like chicken. Maybe he could just catch one or spear one, and it probably did taste a lot like chicken. Just like the chicken when his mother baked it in the oven with garlic and salt, and it turned golden brown and crackled. He shook his head to drive the picture out and moved down the shore. There was a tree with long branches that seemed straight, and when it pulled on one of them and let go, it almost had a vicious snap to it. He picked one of the limbs, and it seemed right, and he began chopping where the limb had joined the tree. The wood was hard, and he didn't want to cause it to split, and it took his time to make several small chops and concentrated on so hard that at first he didn't hear it. A persistent whine, like the insects, only more steady, with an edge of a roar to it, was in his ears. And he chopped and he cut, was thinking about how he would have to make a bow, how it would be when he shaped it with the hatchet, and still the sound did not cut through. The limb was nearly off the tree, and the whine was almost inside his head before he knew it. A plane. It was a motor, far off, but something to get louder. They were coming for him. He threw down the limb and his spear, and holding the hatchet, he started to run for camp. He had to get to the fire up on the bluff and signal to them to get the fire and the smoke up. He put all of his life into his legs, jumped logs, and moved through brush like a lighter ghost, swirling and running, and his lungs filling and blowing, and now the sound was louder, coming in his direction. If not right at him, at least closer. He could see it in all his mind, now the picture, the way it would be. He would get the fire going, and the plane would see the smoke and circle once, and then waggle its wings. It would be a float plane, and it would land on the water and come across the lake, and the pilot would be amazed that he was alive after all these days. All this he saw, and so he ran to the camp and the fire, and that would take him from here, and this very night, he would sit with his father and eat and tell him all the things. He could see it now. Oh yes, as he ran to the sun, his legs liquid springs. He got to camp. Hearing the sound of the engine, and one stick of wood still had a good flame. He dove inside and grabbed the wood and ran across the edge of the ridge, scrambled up like a cat and blew, and nearly had the flame glowing when the sound moved away. It was abrupt, as if the plane had turned. He shielded the sun with his eyes and tried to see it, tried to make the plane become real in his eyes. But the trees were so high and so thick, and now the sound was still fainter. He kneeled again to the flames, and he blew, and he added grass and chips, and the red flames fed and grew, and in moments He had a bonfire as high as his head, but the sound was gone now. Look back, he thought. Look back and see the smoke and turn around. Please turn. Look back, he whispered, feeling all of the pictures fade, seeing his father's face fade like the sound, like lost dreams, like the end of hope. Oh, turn now. Come back. Look back. See the smoke and turn for me. But it kept moving away until he could not even hear it in his imagination, in his soul, gone. He stood on the bluff over the lake, his face cooking in the roaring bonfire, watching the clouds of ash and smoke going into the sky, and thought no more than thought. He knew then that he would not get out of this place. Not now, not ever. That had been the search plane. He was sure of it. That must have been them, and they had come so far off the side of the flight plan and thought they would have to come and then turn back. They did not see his smoke. They did not hear the cry in his mind. They would not return. He would never leave now, never get out of here. He went down to his knees and he felt the tears start, cutting through the smoke and ash on his face, silently falling onto the stone. Gone, he thought finally. It was all gone. All silly and gone. No bows, no spears, or fish or berries. It was all silly anyways. All just a game. He could do a day, but not forever. He would not make it if they did not come for him someday. He would not play the game without hope, and could not play the game without a dream. They had taken it all away from him now. They had turned away from him, and there was nothing for him. The plane was gone, his family gone, all of it gone. They would not come. He was alone, and there was nothing for him.